Hey y'all, and welcome to Teaching Thursdays, where I give commentary on things I'm reading or that I've read. So this week we are coming out of Art on My Mind, Visual Politics by Bell Hooks. Let me move my hand. So I'm gonna be reading quotes from the essay Black Vernacular Architecture as Cultural Practice by Bell Hooks. So I'm going to start out by talking about what is Black vernacular architecture. And this is a quote from the essay. African American professor of architecture Laverne Wells Bowie highlights in her writings the significance of architecture created by folks who were not schooled in the profession or even in the arts of building. She offers the insight that vernacular architecture is a language of cultural expression that exemplifies how the physical environment reflects the uniqueness of a culture. So that kind of grounds this experience Bell Hooks talks about in the essay, where she says in grade school she's given this assignment by her art teacher to, do like a drawing or painting of her dream house. And Bell Hooks realizes that so much about architecture is pushing out the insights of working and poor class Black people and their contributions to space. And so in this assignment, she felt like she had to look outside of her own environment to craft up and design a home and space. And as she reflects on this, she says, "It fascinates me now to think about why a white male Italian immigrant high school art teacher in the segregated South would encourage students to think of artistic practice solely in relation to fantasy and desire. In retrospect, it is clear that this was precisely the kind of assignment that was meant to deflect attention from political realities, from the class, race, and gender differences that separated and divided us from one another. Through this sort of project, we could work harmoniously, focusing on dreams. We could see ourselves as connected, as the same. This would have been a radically different assignment had we been encouraged to think critically about the actual spaces we inhabited, the neighborhoods and houses that were our world. Had we been given such an assignment, we would have learned to think about space politically, about who controls and shapes environments." And that got me thinking about like the quest of what we think is visually pleasing and whose idea is that. And it made me also think about gentrification, the way the sameness and how it makes everything look the same, while also exterminating what is not polished or clean visually in a space, which is gonna cause the removal of disabled people, poor people, and so much more. And so Bell Hooks goes on to critique architecture for, you know, really not including poor people's opinions about space in design, you know, and she talks about standardized housing. And I'm just going to read this sentence she wrote. Standardized housing brought with it a sense that to be poor meant that one was powerless, unable to intervene or transform in any way one's relationship to space. When she's talking about standardized housing here, she's talking about a lot of housing that low income or working class people live in, and the sameness of it, how there's not space for any type of landscape design, how it's almost a punishment for being poor in like a system that is aiding in your poverty. But this also, again, brought me back to gentrification, because the buildings, we all know the look of gentrification. And so I think what I'm reflecting on from this reading is really like the sameness of that landscape, the grocery stores, you know, oh, I know my neighborhood is being gentrified when this grocery store comes, when it has these block-like buildings, and these things, and this sameness. And I'm thinking about the connection of visual, what we see in our landscape, and a connection that shares, and sameness, that's like forced sameness, and how that really kind of goes into fascism and like all these aggressive forms of surveillance. There's also like, I think about how people surveillance each other, what people consider good neighborhoods based on what they visually represent. And another quote I want to share from the reading, you know, just to think about here, is this one here. In today's world, we are led to believe that the lack of material privilege means that one can have no meaningful, constructive engagement with one's living space, and certainly no relationship to aesthetics. I am often disturbed when folks equate a concern with beauty, the design, and the arrangement of space with class privilege. Unfortunately, so many poor people have been socialized by the mass media and the politics of consumerism to see themselves as lacking taste and style. When it comes to issues of architecture and aesthetics, that they have surrendered their capacity to imagine and create. They explain this surrender as the unavoidable consequence of poverty. Yet, lack of material privilege need not be synonymous with poverty of spirit or imagination. Significantly, in the past, even during the most dire circumstances of oppression and exploitation, African Americans could find ways to express their creativity, to display artistry. They dared to use their imagination in ways that were liberatory. Few critics have attempted to look at poor and working class Black folks' relationship to space. We need studies of housing that talk about the way in which the construction of projects, state-owned and designed dwellings for the economically disadvantaged brought an end to the dwelling in shacks that allow for individual creativity and an assertion of aesthetic engagement with space and one's environment. That is gonna be kind of I'm gonna reflect on that one. And I don't know, I think about this push of being a minimalist, clean aesthetic, like the gray, the like, you know, that is like those aesthetics we see on our social media. I want us to think about who is in control of that, who is sponsoring people to post in these, you know, very like void of imagination space. Who is feeding that into us? And deeper than like, oh, this person I follow, but like, what else is behind it? What else is that attached to? And then I also think the sameness she talks about in affordable housing, because this book was put together in 1995, but I see that sameness in gentrification, and also how neighborhoods where black people live have been, you know, cleaned and gutted out. These campuses that these bigger businesses are creating, these compounds for people to do labor, how we are already in a space where labor is attached to your health insurance and how you pay for your housing. So what does it mean with this type of compound living that is not new? Which we're gonna jump into that. Not today. But what does it mean for your freedom when everything is being forced to be and look alike? And what does it mean when we play into these things about how we design space, what we bring into space, who we believe should have access to designing space? So I'm going to continue reading on this and thinking about architecture. The last thing I really want to think about is reflection when we talk about visual politics, and how what we see helps reflect what can be possible. If I look at buildings look the same, if I look at the same grocery stores, the same people got the same stuff on, all of this sameness, this minimal, this void of color, void of life, right? What is that reflecting in what I think about myself and the people around me? How am I policing myself, my desires for an aesthetic that does not belong to me? And so I think we have to critically think about that. I think also the removal, the cutting down, the aggressive cutting down of trees, the destruction and pollution of water, that is a part of our visual politics. And our relationship to these things, how these things are used, who gets to access them. It's just like that reflection piece I think I'm working out in my head as I think about architecture and what it means to have access to space and being able to design your space. I also think about, we live in this culture where people have control over how people even can decorate the insides of their house. People don't have access to lands, not to land, but like to decorate yards and stuff like that. Like there's surveillance when people do that. And so that's some things this is making me think about. And so next video, we're going to continue talking about architecture because that's what I'm reading about right now. So I hope you enjoyed. Please leave a comment if you have any questions. And thanks.